The government on Tuesday introduced a bill in the Lok Sabha to amend the Aircraft Act, whereby the fine amount for violations will be hiked from the existing 10 lakh rupees to up to 1 crore rupees. The Aircraft Amendment Bill 2020 also provides for keeping aircraft belonging to any armed forces of the Union other than naval, from military or air force outside the purview of the Aircraft Act of 1934. Once the amendments are passed, the government would also have the power to issue directions to review, if necessary in public interest, any order passed by the Director General of Civil Aviation, Bureau of Civil Aviation Security and Aircraft Accidents Investigation Bureau, as per the bill's statement of objects and reasons. The bill was introduced by the Minister of State for Parliamentary Affairs, Arjun Ram Meghwal, as Minister of State for Civil Aviation, Hardeep Singh Puri, was not present in the House. The proposed amendments to the Act were approved by the Union Cabinet in December. The Act pertains to control of the manufacture, possession, use, operation, sale, import and export of aircraft. Joining me on the program today to discuss this particular bill are Harshvardhan, aviation expert, Ganapati Subramaniam, aviation journalist, and Chakshu Roy, head of outreach PRS legislative research. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Chakshu, let me begin the program with you. Let's first try and analyze and talk about the salient features of this particular bill.
Frank, even before we get into the bill, let's talk about the fact as to how the bill has come to Parliament. The ministry had, proposed a draft bill as far back as 2016, and it had put the draft bill in the public domain and invited comments on the draft bill. A number of stakeholders, aviation companies, private individuals, airport operators has given comments on the thing. The ministry then decided to incorporate some of those comments, or choose to not listen to some of the comments that were given by the stakeholders. And now the bill has come to Parliament. While you have very succinctly pointed out as to what the bill is trying to do, let me just try to break it down a little bit. The idea of the Aircraft Act is to regulate how aircraft in this country are bought, sold, maintained, so as to ensure that there is flight safety and operational safety is maintained. But Indian aircraft also go outside the jurisdiction of India, and there is an international organization, the International Civil Aviation Organization, that has a number of prescribed guidelines to ensure that there is some standard of aircraft safety which is maintained irrespective of whichever country that your aircraft is coming from. Now, as part of that process, there was an audit that was done for India, and one of the things that audit threw up was that some of the regulatory organizations involved in aircraft operations and aircraft safety were not explicitly defined in the laws of our country. And what that did was, it prevented these regulatory agencies from for example, levying penalties onto people who did not conform with the Aircraft Act. So the audit suggested that some of these agencies, DGCA being one of them, should be explicitly defined in our Aircraft Act. So one of the things that this bill is currently doing is defining 2 or 3 agencies very specifically within the Aircraft Act, and also mentioning the hierarchy in which these agencies will work. So for example, there is a Director General who will be, the DGCA will be responsible to the Director General, and 1 or 2 more agencies. So that's one basket of things that the law is doing. The second basket of things that the law is doing is, it's talking about a certain set of punishments. Now, there was a limit of punishment, penal punishment, at 10 lakh rupees. And when the 2016 draft had come out, the ministry had said that the 10 lakh rupees was established some time ago. There has been an inflation, and you wanted the penalty to be of such an amount that it will be a deterrent. And they recommended the penalty be pushed up to 1 crore. Now, that doesn't mean that everything under the law is punishable with 1 crore. 1 crore. What it means is that there's going to be a gradation. Some offences will be in the higher threshold of 1 crore as defined in the schedule, and some of them will be in a lower threshold. But the maximum that people will be punishable would be, 1 crore. The final thing that it is doing is, there was a little bit of a gap between treatment of aircraft between the Army, the Navy and the Air Force and other security organizations of the Government of India. The BSF has a set of planes, the Coast Guard has a set of planes. And the aircraft of the Army, Navy, Air Force are exempt from the provisions of the Aircraft Act because they follow safety guidelines and operational guidelines of their own forces. Now, these security forces, the BSF, the Coast Guard, they were feeling that while their operational role was also similar to some of the roles being done by the Air Force and the Navy, they should also be provided with some kind of an exemption. So that's the third set of things that the law is doing, providing the same kind of exemption which has so far been available to the armed forces to some of the other security wings which fly aircraft.
Right. Okay. All right. So, Ganapathy Subramanian, let me bring you to the picture now. So, Chakshu Roy has very nicely pointed out to us, exactly what the bill has, what kind of amendments are going to be made. Do you also believe that the Aircraft Act of 1934 has outlived its utility and we need a new bill now to try and address some of the new problems really as far as the civil aviation sector is facing?
Frank, we should look at aviation as a sector as it is operating today as compared to the scenario when these laws were enacted. There is complete change. Of course, the basics remain the same, but then the rules of the game are so different now. Say earlier there were full service carriers where there were a number of facilities available for passengers. Those things have changed and today the rules of the game are far different. The fares may be lower, but then the facilities available to the passengers are also being cut short in a big way. So we know like what kind of insurance policy does an airline follow, what kind of passenger facilitation policy does an airline follow. In case of any default, who is responsible and how is that airline or that organization going to be penalized, and if so, who in that organization will be held responsible? Those things are there. For example, there were a lot of safety audits done by the Director General of Civil Aviation to find out whether airlines are following the safety guidelines. That was done. After that, based on that, what was the action taken? Who were penalized? There is no information on that. Probably no action was taken. So the transparency is lacking and passengers should have the right to know what's happening, what's not. And also question, I cannot allow my safety to be compromised. I cannot allow the safety of my family to be compromised. So I should have the right to question that. One, recently there was a problem with the engines. I don't want to mention the aircraft type or the maker or whatever. Many planes were grounded, etc. But who was responsible for introducing that problem in the first place? Who would have been responsible if any mishap had happened? God forbid nothing has happened, but if something serious had happened, who will be responsible? Those things have to be defined. So therefore I find that the question that you asked is very valid. Rather than going about amending these rules, etc., the time has come for us to lay out completely new law, brand new, according to the demands of not only today but also about future. One important thing is drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, whatever name we may call it. So who is going to be held responsible for them? Tomorrow if they are flying around and something goes wrong, who will be responsible? How will that be regulated? How will that be prevented? Those things also need to be brought in. So these changes are fine because ICAO audit has pointed out that they have to be done, so it is being done. But we need to go beyond this and prepare for the future.
Okay, all right. So that having been said, Mr. Harshvardhan, do we need a complete rehaul, a rejig as far as our laws are concerned, something that is futuristic, something that is forward-looking? Because we've been talking about how the aviation sector is a sector that is going to boom, that is a fast-growing sector in India, and probably we need to keep up with the times, and not just that, but also look to the future.
You see, there is a clear distinction between Aircraft Act and regulations. what we are discussing in the subsequent analysis is more about regulations. Aircraft Act essentially deals with the broad guidelines, which is a national policy, and under the supervision or overseeing purview of Parliament. So Parliament authorizes a particular set of operations with certain natures, like Mr. Ganpati rightly pointed out that the quasi-defense services or the semi-defense services which were performing defense jobs and were still being regulated by civil aviation authorities was a kind of anomaly which has been corrected. Largely it has been an attempt to respond to certain audit queries which ICAO team has mentioned. So basically when we talk of revamping the system or coming out with a new policy, the policy and regulations are different. Act is different. Act is only a kind of a preamble or the basic structure. So far it may have been enacted in 1934, but if you look at it, the Act has performed its functions well. And there has been amendments to it from time to time to meet the local, timely requirements. So the deterrent effect is important, but I think we need to expand the Act little more, because at that time, at least the country never envisaged manufacture of aircrafts and other things. So we need to go into more details, and the Act as yet, the amendments have not concentrated more on it. But where I have certain reservations about this particular amendment is that under the garb of ICAO recommendation, government has put itself as the overseeing authority over DGCA, PCS and air accident agencies. Now DGCA, particularly in most of the countries, the developed countries, is a pure independent autonomous body without any control of the ministerial interference. I think there we need to take a view whether a government role to issue directive is rightly justified or not, because these agencies have to be, although the DGCA is appointed by government only and they work under the framework of constitution, but role of ministry to issue directive may curtail the influence and the independence of DGCA and BCS. I think that is one area which needs to be debated and maybe questioned. But otherwise the Act which the way it has been proposed is keeping in the current times, and earlier the 10 lakh penalty was peanuts, at least 1 crore gives some semblance, because the volume of the industry has become so large and the nature of operations are so multiplied that we need to go for more deterrent punishments, and I think this is a step in the right direction.
Okay, all right, taking the discussion forward then. Chakshu, as far as safety and security requirements are concerned, how much of the focus of the bill is on that, and will the amendments try and address some of those issues as well?
Frank, one of the things that the amendment is also doing is it is putting together a time frame in which you can complain about issues. If there is non-compliance of certain things, there's a provision in the bill that says that you can complain within a period of a year on a matter of a non-compliance within the law. Now, having said that, I think there are 2 or 3 interesting things that we need to think about when we are looking at a bill which deals with aviation. One is the existing set of laws, are they keeping in pace with the rapid movement, both on the commercial side, on the regulatory side, when it comes to the aviation sector. Take for example, the UDAN scheme, right? There is a lot more air connectivity happening within the country. That air connectivity is not only limited to metros but also to smaller towns and in between smaller towns. So just the amount of passenger traffic is going to increase manifold. Increased passenger traffic then results in airport congestions, more usage of aircraft, and that requires more diligence when it comes to safety audits by the regulatory authorities. And if the regulatory authorities have a lot more independence and are supported not only in manpower but also, with resources, that safety aspect can be strengthened. Now, that is an aspect that the law will not, talk about. That is an aspect that we have to go into the details of the functioning of the law and keep checking that. And while, over the last few years, we haven't had a major, passenger accident, how do we ensure that that trend continues? Right? I mean, we've had, a couple of non-scheduled operators, their planes crashing here and there, but we haven't had a major, incident in our airspace. That's one. The second part of it is, while we are talking not only about safety, the conversation should also be about viability of, the commercial aviation sector as such. Again, it's not the responsibility of the bill, which is just a regulatory framework, as Harshvardhan ji was pointing out. But when this bill is getting debated in Parliament or debated in the Parliamentary Standing Committee, the viability of ensuring, whether it is Air India or other private carriers, how do we ensure that they are commercially viable? Because only if they are commercially viable will they be investing enough resources in ensuring passenger safety, right? If that's not the case, people will either shut operations or compromise on safety, and we would not want either of those to happen.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the role of the regulatory bodies. Does the do the proposed amendments broaden the scope of, say, the DGCA, the PCS, and the AIB, or does it curtail them at some level?
See, till now, the DGCA has been just functioning as an arm of the Ministry of Civil Aviation, part of the government. That's also because of historical reasons. Till recently, there was a time when the ATC was also part of the DGCA. Then it was separated and taken into the Airport Authority of India, etc. Then there was no accident investigation bureau. Air accidents, there used to be a court of inquiry ordered and handed over to that. Similarly, even the railways did not have an accident investigation bureau. Railway accidents were given to the Ministry of Civil Aviation to investigate. So those are things that are evolving. As Mr. Harshvardhan pointed out, the DGCA should become an independent regulator like SAB or IRDA. That would be the ideal situation. So that is the reason why we should take a leap forward in terms of legislation also. I completely agree that the regulations are different and the law is different. But the regulations have to flow from the act. So then only there will be complete legal sanctity. Otherwise there is always a possibility of somebody challenging it, and in a court of law it will be questioned, etc. So therefore that legal backing has to be there through the legislative power. And Mr. Chaksu pointed out how commercial aspects are also being impacted. So one simple thing is that, like he said, there has been no major accidents. There was one mid-air collision, Charki Dadri, close to the capital, was a major accident, and there was one crash at Patna. Those were the recent ones, and there was also an accident at the Delhi airport, but that did not result in a major crash or any casualties. Because of these things, the cost of insurance comes down. So it is a benefit to the airline company as well as the passenger, which should be the ultimate goal. Passengers, the civil aviation, everything should be focused on the passenger only. Let's not talk about defense. Defense is completely different. Their ATC is different. Their rules and regulations are different. But here, the laws, rules will apply more here. Even if there are multiple laws in defense, I have my doubts how much of it will be actually applied on ground, because they work on certain level of confidentiality and rules and regulations. Many things are secret, cannot be left in the open, etc. But for civil aviation, there has to be a passenger centric, open kind of a law where say IRDA or SEBI, the consumer should be able to question and benefit. Whether a benefit is denied to a consumer or not should be very clear. From the law, the power should flow to the consumer. So that's what, and if that is done, Airline companies cannot function arbitrarily, even airport operators cannot function arbitrarily. Of course, there are different organizations, etc., that are looking after it now. All that is fine. But ideal situation will be to put it all together to make it at least one umbrella law from which organizations get their power and the rules and regulations are formed in terms of civil aviation.
Absolutely. All right. So, since we are here, Mr. Harshvardhan, I must ask you this. So, what is the role of the regulatory bodies and what are the biggest challenges that they face as of now?
You see, principally all these organizations in one form or the other, the operators, what we call, whether it is an airport organization, whether it is a airlines operations, whether it is ATC, they are all come under the purview of regulatory agencies. So regulatory agency has to create a role or a kind of basic preamble or guidelines for operations from the technical safety point of view and the security point of view. Earlier safety was the primary consideration, but last 30 years we have seen the security is becoming an equally serious issue, so that's why the security functions are also evolving more and more into day-to-day operations. Now, as I said, that law by itself is enough. You need because this is just a flow of a guideline. Rest all comes under the policies and the implementation part of it. On that score, there has been some improvement, some updation, but one of the biggest challenge of all these regulatory agencies is the updation of knowledge and the induction of qualified technical manpower. Being part of the government, they are not able to attract the best talent. And the second thing is their training infrastructure, the regulatory system, they are a bit antiquated, though they have been within their own resources, they have been doing it. So I think one of the first challenges to updation of knowledge, and then if you know the technology in aviation industry, whether it pertains to airport management, whether it pertains to aircraft management, passenger services, it is changing so fast. Literally the technology today has a lifespan of 2 to 5 years maximum. Earlier it used to be 15-20 years. The speed with which the technology is changing, the regulatory agency has not been able to come to that level. Then secondly, some of the very good divisions which were part of the original DGCA, somewhere they have lost track of updation of knowledge, maybe because of lack of resources or bureaucratic issues. But you know, today we do not have a good R&D division which deals with the aircraft issues. If you really see what happened in 737 MAX and what is happening in Pratt & Whitney engines, we do not have an infrastructure and competence where we can actually define or analyze an aircraft. The way the FAA has acted in case of 737, the way EASA has acted in case of Pratt & Whitney engines fitted on new engine, it is now their role is coming into questioning. You can no longer treat them as the final authority or gospel. You need to go do your own investigation. And Indian operations, Indian environment is in any case most challenging. You know, all kind of weathers are there, the growth, some of the airports are most equipped, some of them are very ill equipped. But we are operating them admirably under the circumstances. The technical skills of people and the demand is very high. So principally, we need to have a complete, competent technical and regulatory mechanism by which we are able to define our own parameters, because we are no longer a small third world country. We are one of the largest aviation market in the world. So biggest challenge is to stand up to that level and be a regulatory authority in your own way, you know.
Right.
That is the challenge.
Okay, all right. It's time now to get closing comments from all my guests with the best way forward. Concluding remarks, starting first with you, Chakshu Roy.
Frank, I think the panel's brought about two very important issues. Both Ganpati ji and Harshvardhan ji have pointed out that what should be the role of the regulator. We already have a separate airport economic regulator. Is it now time for Parliament to discuss within the ambit of this bill a more independent regulator for civil aviation? So that's one point. The second point is technical skill upgradation and just the technical skills within the country. If we were to talk about becoming a hub for, let's say, aircraft manufacture or aircraft parts manufacturer or engine manufacturer, who will certify those engines? Will that certification be something that will be acceptable by international authorities or not? Those are things that we need to consider in the following years when people are discussing this law.
All right, Ganapathy Subramaniam.
Yeah. Again, I would like to emphasize on the consumer angle, because consumer is everything. Ultimately, without the consumer, there is no civil aviation, no airline company, no airport. And then airports and airline companies, as Mr. Chakru has pointed out, they have to work together. Without an airport, an airline company cannot function, and without an airline company, what will an airport do? So therefore, it is all intertwined. So therefore, we should look at it from a holistic point of view, because this government is known for doing away with several acts which have outlived their utility, and they're coming out with a new law. So therefore, I think we should think of this also, because it takes a lot of time. It doesn't happen that there is a discussion today and it's done tomorrow. It takes a long time, and civil aviation is not a very simple subject. Every aspect of safety, security and passenger facilitation, everything has to be taken care. For example, very simple thing like when your flight is delayed, who is responsible for that? What will be the penalty? How should you be compensated? Is there any clarity? A very simple thing, but there is no clarity. I don't say that everything should be put in a law, but there should be a power from which the regulations and guidelines are derived. Once that is done for each and every aspect, and also the future new aspects, maybe there may be a time when there will be more unmanned aircraft operating around Delhi than the usual piloted flights. So we should prepare for all those and look at the way forward. Okay. Then only we will make a great beginning.
Okay, all right. And Mr. Harshvardhan, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Well, I think it is a step in the right direction, but we need to go forward, and there are many more challenging issues civil aviation in the country is facing. But I think something